Welcome to the fourth section of the CART tutorial. Let's do some refactoring with the filter. So initially I was returning only if the item had a matching character string, and I would only return at that point. However, I want to show you another way to go ahead and do this. We can add a class named hide, and with the same ternary operator, it still returns it, you can't see it based on my hide class, which is display none. I'll use hide throughout, and this is just another example of me being able to filter. Those items are really there, but you just can't see them based on my hide. Here's the hide being represented, and we're off. Okay, let's build the content management system. For the most part, content management system is going to be a CRUD application. So create, read, update, and delete. We're going to start off building it locally within the local storage, and then towards some other later videos, we'll build it into an actual database. And let's just get the basic HTML cleared away here. And I think I was using an H2 with some padding or margin on the top. So our inventory is going to be known as the variable items. And it's going to be a hook, so we can set items. We're going to check and see on load if there are any items saved locally. And I'm going to use the use effect to check that first. And with use effect, I only want to run this once, so I'm going to have a loaded variable, and it starts off defaulted to false, and then once it runs once, it gets set to true, and it doesn't run again. And within this, I'll fire off anything I need to run just one time. Here we go. We determine if there are items in local storage, and if so, we'll set our items object accordingly. Now remember, everything that comes in from local storage is a string. And that's the way we saved it, so we just have to parse it back out. Let's go ahead and build out our button group. This is going to select whether we're editing or adding, deleting. And anything you want to catch off the button group, you can find any information on Bootstrap's website, the documentation. And these, once clicked, will determine the function we'll be using. Like I said, add, edit, or delete. So they're going to be setting a hook named active_func, and to set that would be set active_func. So at this point, when we click on it, that will determine what function we're going to use, and it will also determine which button is active amongst these in the button group. Here I'm going to pass my active function as add here. And if it equals add, we will be adding the class active, predetermined Bootstrap class. And if it's not the active function, it's just going to be the regular classes. And we'll just do this to the rest of them, the rest of the buttons in the button group. There you go. This will say edit when clicked. This will pass the delete string. Okay, let's bring the content management module into the application. Just like our other modules, they will be toggled on and off based on the nav clicking. I'll just add another line item, add the link to the content management system. I'm going to call this inventory. There we go. The inventory is now working. And there's my button group. I definitely want to get the button group to spread all the way across the width of the container. So let me toy around with some of the classes that might give me that opportunity. Form control within Bootstrap is pretty standard for input fields to go all the way across, select menus, so on and so forth, but it does come with some padding that I'll have to turn off. Not a big deal. I can group the button group class and the form control class together and then tell it to do no padding. The column medium 12 will do the same, but we'll see. Okay, moving on. List unstyled. We don't want to have any bullets for these line items. And we'll go ahead and build our form out. As always, the name is going to be the most important thing that identifies this field. A lot of people who use ID, name's the way to go. That's what your browser is going to remember when you start typing things in. With the hints and whatnot, the name is doing all that. So, good rule to stick by. All right. So we have name. We've got the item name. We've got the price. We'll add a little bit more in depth to these objects. I'm going to have details put together here. And you'll see later on I'll even bring in category. I have done images before, and then you can do an entire library of images per item. So you can get carried away. It's not a problem to get carried away with options. As you can see, I'm using my form control again. This is a standard row size, and here's where our validation begins in the front end. Me limiting characters that can be inputted. There'll be more validation to come, front and back end. This is where it all starts. And I'm just making these up on the fly. As we go further in, I'll match these up so that when we're expecting a certain amount of characters, these will apply there too. Okay, so let's try a little more styling, and if I'm not mistaken, I finally stopped dealing with this right about here. So those two classes put together, when that happens, those button groups will go all the way across with no padding. It'll look a lot cleaner. There we go. That's it. Let's go ahead and start our buttons. I'm going to save HTML and actually write this form will be the edit and the add. And based on our function, the user is going to see one button for send and one button for edit. But the fields will stay the same. It will just be the buttons that will toggle, and we'll fire off a different function per button. Here's the ternary operator for this. So if active func is equal to add, the ternary operator says go ahead and show this button. This line item has a button in it, and that will be our add item. Otherwise, show edit. And delete will trump them all. One thing that we will need within deleting and editing is a select menu of all the items we have currently in our inventory. So this select menu is going to be determining that. And it's only going to write something if there are any items in the item object. I've got a misspelling I'll catch here in a second. Yes. Unfortunately, two misspellings. It's not options, it's option. And length is spelled differently, but we'll get to that in due time. And if the length of items is 0, we'll just not show these. And another thing is we're going to need some correct padding, otherwise the select menu will go outside the other columns. So we'll just incorporate these together. Now the ternary operator for this column here, I'm not going to need this form if we're trying to delete something, only if I'm adding or editing. So therefore, based on our active function, if it's in delete, I don't even show this at all. I will show the delete button instead. Now everybody sees where we're going with this. Let's go ahead and wrap this in a column. There we go. And let's start with the validation. Validation is something everybody's going to end up having to do. My advice is keep it all in one spot. Come up with some function that fits your needs, and don't have it spread out everywhere. Make it a very consolidated, straightforward function. And my advice is going to be accepting all the fields you'd like to validate and have the validate function run a for loop through each field and determine independently whether that field is valid or not. This is where you can start bringing in regular expressions to see if it matches, for instance, all numbers. This is also if there is nothing there, we'll determine that as well. But we can start doing things like figuring out if this is the same pattern as an email, or determining how many numbers are in it and if it matches enough to be a phone number. So based on the amount of forms you have, you can really go really far. Definitely a good way to match things before they head out to the database. You need to require it being a string or a number. This is your time. First thing I want to do when I run a validate function, I want to clear out all the errors that I currently have, because based on how many errors I have, I will stop the submission of whatever data I'm doing. So if there's something with an error wrapped around the field, then it will stop. So I clear out all the errors. I determine what all numbers are going to be, because I'm going to have a numbers only field. So my regular expression num only is stated. Now let's start running through the fields from the array that was put in when validate was selected. I'm going to be careful not to assume that there's something in the field just yet, and then that being the case, if there's not anything in the field, JavaScript will break. So therefore, let's determine what value is first, and then we'll see, hey, does that field have anything? If it's not null, let's redefine what value is, and that will turn into the value of what element was. And there's a couple ways to do it. In a minute, I'm going to show you another one. It's useful, called a try-catch. It's very similar. And this is what we'll be applying the error class, and that in turn will determine whether we do or do not stop the submission of data. So if it's default or empty, we apply error to the field. Otherwise, we remove it. Now here's where we want to find out if something's currency. Now as you see up there earlier, I listed a constant called num only, and it's a regular expression that determines what all numbers are. And here I am trying to determine if this field does match that consistency, that requirement. Is currency. And there we are. Now we'll try to find out if any of those strings match, make sure those characters match. Let's go ahead and determine if it's not an integer by putting in exclamation point. So if it's not an integer, please add error to the field. let's import our validate function to the content management module. And as we add the items, you'll see I will be applying error to anything that doesn't match up my requirements. And here's my validate function being called. I need to send down each name of every field. So validate will check them one at a time. Now we are going to be utilizing the show alert function. So if validate ends up adding error to any field item that I've checked, we will be applying the show alert to let the user know there's an error. Then we will pass along the Bootstrap keyword for red, which is danger. And just in case it does work, there's no errors, let's just show, for example, the success. Okay, let's add item on click. And let's let everybody know what error is going to look like. It's just going to be a red border for the input field. Now here's an interesting thing. I'm going to utilize a try catch to determine that there is a value for the price field. So as price gets determined, if there's not a value for it, I do not want to break this. So if not, I will add a class list of error in case that happens. All right, let me just go ahead and fix this quick error here. I don't have the index iteration listed on the fields variable. Okay, should be good now. So there's an error, as you can see, and another one. That one requires numbers. There we go. That one's working. There we go, no errors. Validation is now working. Let's clean it up a little bit here. Let's build the inventory in local storage. Let's go ahead and move add item above use effect. We'll also go ahead and build a temp items here that will start out empty. Actually, let's just make it items for now. And then we'll basically put together the spread operator to add into the current items object. And here's an example of what we're kind of dealing with thus far. It's not 100%, but we need to start determining what the values of those fields are, and then we can put in some non-static data or values. We also want to remember that if there are any errors, not only do we want to show that error pop up, the alert, but we also want to stop all the JavaScript. So we return false, we'll stop everything, and we will not go forward if there are any errors. So price is going to be determined by the price field value. Category as well. and our details text area will be the value we determined as well. Now let's just use modern JavaScript and go ahead and clean up this object. I think I've done some misspellings here, which is not uncommon. All right, let's save this to local storage. Make sure you make it a string, otherwise it won't save correctly. Now we want to make these lowercase. Let's go ahead and put them where they belong over here, though. Like I said, it's a good thing to have things just in lowercase and save it that way. Price obviously not going to be an issue. And let's see if we can save this item. There we go. The item has been saved. We'll have to come back to the cart later. And we also want to determine if the item's object has more than 0, if there's an actual at least one item in the item's object, we're going to go ahead and write this select menu. If there's no items, then we won't write it. Let's add some data. Now editing is going to be, like I said, using the same form as the add. I'm going to spell that correctly. We're going to determine what item was selected within the select dropdown, which was named item select. So selected item is going to tell you that value, and it's going to be an iteration number is what it's going to tell you. What number is it in the order of the object? Now temp items is something I typically always do. And one more thing, we do need to set the items. Not only are we setting it in the local storage, but we'll be setting it here in state as well using hooks. So whatever item iteration number was selected, I'm going to find the temp item's name within that iteration and change it to whatever the value is of the field named item name. So it'll replace it. We're also going to throw in our validation just like we did with add item. It's going to be the exact same setup. We're going to run validate and pass the array of fields. If validate causes any item, any field to have the error class, we show alert, and then we return false to stop. Otherwise, we keep going, renaming the values based on the iteration number for item name, price, category, and details. And lowercase is something I'm consistently doing when it's a string. Details be represented here. Okay, so these will now be changing what that object iteration value is based on what the value is of the field. Now we'll set items and store it in local storage. So the edit is now operational. gotta get that S out of the options tag or it won't run. There we go. Now, we really only want to show this menu if it doesn't have the add option. So you see how we don't need the drop down if we're adding something, only if we're editing and deleting. So let's add a new item. It's in the category of butcher, it's bacon, just some details for what the bacon is. Looks like we got little problems. You might want to add the function to populate the fields when you select something. So when I hit populate fields from my select menu, I need that item's values to show up in their appropriate fields. Otherwise it doesn't really know what to edit. We would start fresh. So we get the item iteration number to fill out the field with the item name that corresponds to the one selected. So all these fields will basically fill up with whatever that iteration number is selected within the select field. Or select menu, sorry. And let's apply the edit function on click to the button. And I also want to have clearform as a function represented. When I choose to fire off clearform, I'm going to go through all the fields and clear out whatever values they have, and I'm also going to put any select menus back to the first option. You'll see that I use this for our text areas as well, and it comes in handy to clear out all the fields once something has been successful. Very useful for each loop. Now we'll go through each select menu and tell it on each one we'd like it to go to the select index of 0. We'll apply clear forms whenever we click different buttons determining our functionality that's active. So we will have to change this from setting something that directly sets state with a hook to an actual function, so it would be doing more than one thing. So I'm going to create a function called switchFunc. So with switchFunc, I'm actually going to pass the function just like the other a minute ago. I'm still going to set my function, my active function. Let's re-represent this. So now instead of just doing one thing, I'm doing that and something else. Basically, I'm compiling a couple of different things I need to get done here. And then we'll put a default for the item select menu. I'll let the application know if the value is default not to do anything. And just return false to stop. Okay. There we go. We are now populating fields. And editing correctly. Let's add another item. And let's go ahead and add the delete function. An interesting thing here, just like the other page, I want to make sure that they're absolutely sure they want to delete something. The user sometimes does something at the last second, and we don't want them to have to go through that kind of pain. So what I'm going to use is our simple toggle that we used the other day, and it's just going to have an alert message box with a yes or no option. So are you sure you'd like to delete this object or this item? And just like the cart page, we're going to do the same thing that we did a couple days ago. And I'll just even copy the whole div, the alert div. Just to save some time, you can see I'll put my alert div here. And if our function is delete item for toggle, if our toggle represents delete item, which would be what is submitted once this is clicked, we will then show our alert box. And within that alert box, we have the text, are you sure you want to delete this item? And the yes actually fires off the delete item function. That's not real complicated, but helpful. So we'll go ahead and put delete item. Let's find the value of the item select menu. And remember that value is going to be an iteration number. So all we need to do is have temp items be an empty object. We walk through each item within the items object. As long as the iteration number does not match what was selected in the item select menu, we're going to go ahead and push that item iteration and all of its keys and values into the temp items. So one at a time, we build temp items without the item selected in the item select menu. And at that point, we will set temp items. So let's delete hot dogs. Are you sure you want to delete it? Yes. Hot dogs is gone. We now have a locally working CRUD system. One quick detail regarding the price going into our local storage. This turns the price into a string instead of a number. So therefore, you can see everything's broken when we try to calculate. What I'm going to do is switch this to force it back into a number when we calculate. Therefore, it will work and this will be fixed. Just an interesting thing you have to do when you realize you're working with local storage. Numbers can easily get turned right there into strings.